Love rarely disappears cleanly in Runeterra. Across these 12 stories, it outlived death, betrayal, fallen kingdoms, and even the people who first carried it. But what remained was often too damaged to become a normal life again. A difficult romance is not automatically a tragic one, so this account will stay with relationships clearly supported by the law and permanently altered by loss. Some lovers were separated forever, while others found their way back only to discover that survival could not restore the years, trust, or future taken from them. If you enjoy long, carefully researched League lore you can relax or fall asleep to, this is a must-subscribe for more stories from across Runeterra. No relationship demonstrates that difference more clearly than the marriage of Viego and Isolde. Their story is often reduced to a king who lost his queen and destroyed a civilization while trying to recover her. But the truth begins long before the Ruination. It begins with a prince who was never supposed to inherit a throne. Viego was the second son of a dynastic king in Camavor. Because the crown was expected to pass to his older brother, little was demanded of him, and he grew accustomed to comfort without responsibility. The death of his brother changed that arrangement at once. A young man raised without preparation became the ruler of a powerful kingdom, and the qualities that had seemed harmless in a prince became dangerous in a king. He showed little interest in governing. Camavor possessed armies, wealth, court traditions, and enemies, yet Viego treated the obligations of rule as distractions from the life he preferred. That life changed when he met Isolde, a seamstress whose position sat far below his own. He became captivated by her, and despite the difference in status, he married her and made her his queen. Nothing in the law suggests that Isolde sought political power. Her importance came from Viego's attachment to her, an attachment so complete that the rest of Camavor began to feel secondary. He showered her with attention and gifts, and he neglected affairs of state to remain beside her. To Viego, that devotion proved the depth of his love. To the people expected to keep the kingdom functioning, it revealed how little space remained in their king's mind for anything else. This distinction matters because the tragedy did not transform a wise ruler into a selfish one. Viego already possessed the habits that later magnified his grief. He expected desire to be answered, treated obstacles as insults, and confused the strength of his feelings with the justice of his actions. Isolde may have loved him, but her love could not correct the parts of him that kingship had allowed to grow unchecked. Camavor's enemies eventually acted against him. An assassin came for the king with a poisoned blade, but the attack failed to take Viego's life. Isolde received the wound instead. The poison worked slowly enough to leave Viego searching for a cure, and that search consumed the crown's wealth while the kingdom around him weakened. He sent people across the world in pursuit of any remedy that might save her. Every failure made him more desperate, and desperation gradually replaced judgment. When Isolde finally died, Viego refused to accept that her life had ended. The duties he had once ignored now became tools for a single private purpose. Camavor's treasury, soldiers, and royal authority were directed toward recovering one person, no matter what that effort demanded from everyone else. His niece Callista had already become one of the kingdom's greatest warriors. Loyal to the crown and determined to help Isolde, she crossed distant seas seeking a cure and found the Blessed Isles, a hidden land protected by pale mist. The people there possessed knowledge and healing waters unknown to most of Runeterra. Callista believed she had found the answer, but she returned too late. Isolde was gone. Callista initially kept the island's location secret. The masters of that land had warned her that their sanctuary could not be exposed, and the healing waters were never offered as a way to reverse death. Viego cared about neither limit. When he learned that a possible answer existed, even one discovered too late, he demanded to be taken there. What followed joined the fall of a marriage to the destruction of an entire civilization. Viego carried Isolde's preserved body across the sea with an armed force. Callista's commander, Hecarim, encouraged the expedition for reasons of his own, and when the islanders refused the king's demand, violence followed. The Blessed Isles had remained concealed for generations. Yet Viego's inability to release the past brought Camavor's ambitions directly into them. Within the island's sacred waters, he placed Isolde in the hope that their magic would return her. Something answered, but it was not the reunion he expected. Isolde rose, confused and distressed, caught between death and an unnatural return. In that moment, she took Viego's enchanted blade and drove it into him. The magic within the sword met the power of the waters, and the result became the Ruination. A wave of corrupted force swept through the Blessed Isles, twisting spirits, landscapes, and living beings into the Shadow Isles known in the present age. Viego and Isolde were torn apart once more, while countless others were trapped in the consequences of a king's refusal to mourn. More than 1,000 years passed before Viego rose again. Time did not soften his purpose. He remembered Isolde as the answer to every absence within him, and the black mist became an extension of that need. Wherever fragments of her soul had settled, he pursued them, ruining minds and nations as he went. To Viego, the damage remained secondary because he believed recovering Isolde would justify it. Isolde's scattered soul had touched several lives. Part of her remained within Senna, another fragment existed in Yorick's Maiden of the Mist, and Gwen had been awakened by the portion connected to the doll Isolde made in life. These fragments did not turn those people into simple containers. Each developed an identity and purpose of its own, which made Viego's attempt to reclaim his wife an assault on lives he did not consider fully real. When Isolde was briefly restored during the conflict remembered as the Ruination, Viego finally heard the answer he had avoided for centuries. His devotion had not honored her. It had trapped her memory inside his wants and brought suffering to people she never would have chosen to harm. The queen he claimed to love did not ask for the world he was trying to build, and she did not see his destruction as proof of loyalty. That is where the love story truly ends. Viego's tragedy is not simply that Isolde died. Death began the disaster, but his refusal to recognize her wishes completed it. He loved an image of Isolde that could never disagree with him, while the real Isolde rejected what he had done in her name. By the time he understood that difference, Camavor had vanished, the Blessed Isles had become a place of torment, and generations of people had suffered beneath the black mist. Their marriage left behind one of Runeterra's clearest warnings about love without restraint. Viego believed that the scale of his sacrifice measured the purity of his devotion. The law shows the opposite. Sacrifice forced on strangers is not devotion, and refusing to let another person go is not the same as respecting them. Isolde's loss wounded him, but his choices turned that wound into a catastrophe. The Ruination also destroyed another relationship, one quieter than the king's marriage, but in many ways more faithful. Callista and Ledros did not possess the public grandeur of Viego and Isolde. Their story survived in fragments, unfinished conversations, and a search that continued long after both had lost their mortal lives. Before the fall of the Blessed Isles, Callista served Camavor as a general and as the king's niece. She valued duty, honor, and loyalty, qualities that made her useful to Viego even when he did not deserve them. Ledros served beside her. He was a skilled warrior, and his feelings for Callista extended beyond military loyalty, though the demands surrounding them left little room for an ordinary life together. Their relationship was restrained. Neither abandoned duty to pursue it, and there was no royal display comparable to Viego's marriage. What existed between them appeared through trust, and what remained unsaid. That quietness later became part of the tragedy, because the destruction of their world arrived before they could build anything beyond the bond they already shared. Callista's search for a cure brought her to the Blessed Isles, and her promise to protect their location placed her in direct conflict with Viego. Once Hecarim persuaded the king that force could obtain what the islanders denied him, Callista faced a choice between obedience and honor. She refused to reveal what she had sworn to protect. Hecarim answered that refusal with betrayal. The soldiers who should have followed Callista turned against her, and the trust at the center of her life was destroyed along with her. Ledros could not save her. The ruination that followed captured both of them within the Shadow Isles, but it did not preserve them in the same way. Callista became a spirit of vengeance. The individual woman who had commanded Camavor's armies faded beneath the weight of countless betrayed souls. People in later ages could call upon the spear of vengeance by offering themselves to her purpose, yet each pact strengthened the force that had replaced much of Callista's former identity. She remembered betrayal more readily than affection, because betrayal had become the principle around which her existence was organized. Ledros retained more of himself. That difference condemned him to understand what had been lost. He searched the Isles for Callista and tried repeatedly to reach the person inside the spectral figure. Each encounter offered the possibility that she might recognize him, and each failure demonstrated how much of her had been buried. At one point, Ledros believed that destroying the blade connected to her death might free her. He carried part of that weapon and pursued an answer through the ruins, even while hostile spirits mocked the hope that kept drawing him back. His efforts were not the grand obsession of Viego. He did not try to remake the world or force Callista into a life she no longer possessed. He wanted to release her, even if freedom meant losing the last connection between them. That difference makes Ledros one of the most sorrowful figures on the Shadow Isles. Viego could not accept Isolde's will because it opposed his desire. Ledros faced the possibility that helping Callista might leave him alone, and he continued anyway. His love survived as recognition of her suffering rather than ownership of her future. Callista occasionally seemed to respond to him, but the moment never lasted. The many voices within the Spear of Vengeance overwhelmed the memory of one woman and one man. Ledros could stand before the person he had loved and still remain almost invisible to her. Their story has no clean conclusion, no confirmed restoration returns Callista to her mortal identity, and no final reunion releases Ledros from his search. They remain caught inside the same cursed land, separated less by distance than by what the ruination made of them. One remembers too much, while the other cannot hold the memory for long. Viego and Isolde show love corrupted by possession. Callista and Ledros show love defeated by the loss of identity itself. Ledros does not need to cross an ocean to find Callista. He can reach her and speak to her, yet the person who might have answered survives only in brief traces. It is a smaller tragedy than the fall of the Blessed Isles, but perhaps a more intimate one. The Black Mist would eventually reach another couple centuries later, and for a time it appeared to repeat the same ending. Lucian and Senna were sentinels of light, partners joined by marriage and by the dangerous work of fighting the undead. Their tragedy began with separation, but unlike the stories of Viego and Ledros, it did not end where death first seemed to place it. Lucian grew up hearing about the Sentinels through his father Urias. Members of that ancient order carried relic weapons made from sacred stone and travelled wherever unnatural darkness threatened the living. Urias spent long periods away from home, which left Lucian fascinated by the work, but separated from the person who might have trained him. Senna entered his life through that absence. She had joined the Sentinels after a childhood marked by the Black Mist, and she became Urias's apprentice. A strange curse drew the mist toward her wherever she went. Rather than hide forever, Senna learned to confront it, turning the force that pursued her into the reason she fought. When Urias died, Senna brought the news to Lucian. She also carried his father's weapon, and what began as a difficult meeting grew into a partnership. Lucian joined her work, first with more determination than experience, while Senna supplied knowledge earned through years of fighting creatures most people barely understood. Their opposing qualities strengthened the bond. Lucian brought speed, confidence, and a direct approach to danger. Senna understood patience and the cost of meeting darkness without preparation. Over time, the two became effective sentinels and fell in love. Their marriage did not remove the danger surrounding them, but it gave each a partner who understood why the work could not simply be abandoned. The curse following Senna eventually brought them to Thresh. Unlike mindless spirits within the Black Mist, Thresh enjoyed recognizing what people valued and turning it into a source of suffering. He did not merely defeat enemies, he collected souls within his lantern, keeping them conscious and confined. Lucian and Senna confronted him together, but the encounter ended with Senna trapped inside the lantern. To Lucian, the result looked final. The woman he loved had vanished into a prison he could neither enter nor break, and Thresh remained free to use that loss against him. Grief narrowed Lucian's purpose. He continued fighting the undead, yet the campaign became increasingly personal. Every wraith destroyed, and every trail followed, pointed toward Thresh. He took up Senna's relic weapon alongside his own, carrying the physical sign of their partnership, even when he believed the partnership itself had ended. Years of pursuit changed him. The confident sentinel who had once balanced Senna's caution grew severe, and the need to punish Thresh threatened to eclipse the wider mission he had inherited. Lucian still protected people, but hatred moved beside duty. Thresh understood that transformation and encouraged it because pain made Lucian easier to manipulate. Inside the lantern, Senna had not disappeared. She existed among the souls Thresh had collected, and the curse that once drew the mist toward her gave her an unusual connection to it. Rather than surrender her identity, she learned from the spirits around her and gathered strength within the place meant to break her. When Lucian finally damaged the lantern, Senna emerged. The reunion contradicted everything he had accepted about her fate. She returned physically changed and carrying power connected to the Black Mist, yet she remained herself. For one of Runeterra's tragic couples, death had not produced the expected ending. Return did not erase what happened. Lucian had spent years shaping his life around grief and revenge, while Senna had endured years among trapped souls. They loved one another, but neither could simply resume the marriage from the moment before Thresh took her. Both carried knowledge the other could not fully share. Senna also understood that her curse was connected to a much larger danger. A fragment of Isolde's soul had rested within her since childhood, though its meaning took time to become clear. That fragment helped explain why the Black Mist pursued her, and why her fate became entangled with Viego's return. Lucian responded to Senna's new connection with fear. He had recovered her once, and the possibility of losing her again made him protective in ways that could limit her choices. Senna, however, could not treat survival as permission to step away. The power within her offered a means to confront the source of the mist, and she believed that responsibility belonged to her. Their conflict never meant that love had vanished. It showed how tragedy can remain inside a relationship after reunion. Lucian wanted to preserve the person he had fought so long to recover. Senna needed him to see that preservation without freedom could become another kind of prison. During Viego's campaign, both joined the effort to oppose him. Senna's connection to Isolde made her a target, and the struggle again forced Lucian to face the possibility of separation. This time, however, Senna stood beside allies who recognized her as more than someone to protect. She had become a leader within the renewed Sentinels of Light. The conflict ended without repeating Thresh's first victory. Lucian and Senna remained together, but their love story still belongs among the tragic ones because the original life they shared did end. Senna lost years inside the lantern, Lucian lost years to vengeance, and both emerged into a marriage that had to be learned again under conditions neither had chosen. Unlike Viego, Lucian eventually had to accept that loving someone did not grant him authority over the risks they were willing to take. Unlike Callista, Senna retained enough of herself to answer the person calling her name. Those differences prevented loss from becoming permanent, yet they did not make the experience harmless. Their story offers the rare example of tragedy followed by continuation. The wound remains part of the relationship without becoming its only meaning. Lucian cannot recover the time he spent believing Senna gone, and Senna cannot erase her imprisonment, but both can choose what happens after it. In Runeterra, that is close to a hopeful ending, though it is far from an untouched one. Far from the Shadow Isles, another pair encountered a prison of a different kind. Valmar and Kai were Ionian hunters, whose attempt to save one another bound them to an ancient Darkin. Their love survived inside the being called Varus, but survival came at the cost of their bodies, their freedom, and the future they might have shared. Valmar and Kai lived in Ionia, a land where communities existed in close relationship with the spirits and natural magic surrounding them. When Noxus invaded, that balance broke across the region. Villages became battlefields, defenders were forced into unfamiliar kinds of warfare, and weapons hidden from earlier ages began returning to the world. The two men fought together as hunters. Their relationship was not presented as a distant legend or an uncertain attraction. They loved one another, and that bond determined the choice that later joined their lives to Varus. During the violence surrounding the invasion, Kai suffered a wound that Valmar could not treat by ordinary means. Nearby lay a temple containing a Darkin weapon. The power within it was dangerous, and approaching it meant ignoring every reason such a weapon had been sealed away. Valmar entered because the person he loved was dying. The entity inside the bow offered power capable of saving Kai. Desperation made the cost seem secondary. Valmar surrendered himself, believing the choice could preserve his partner, while the Darkin used the opening to take both men. Their bodies and souls were drawn together with the ancient being. From that union emerged Varus, no longer exactly the Darkin who had been imprisoned, and not simply either of the mortals whose forms he had consumed. Three wills occupied one body, though the Darkin initially held the greatest control. Varus carried a history older than Valmar and Kai. Before his imprisonment, he had served ancient Shurima, and later became one of the corrupted Ascended, remembered as the Darkin. Rage, loss, and the violence of wars stretching across ages shaped him. When he gained a body through the two hunters, he wanted vengeance and sought the remaining members of his kind. Valmar and Kai resisted him from within. Their love, the very reason they had become vulnerable to the weapon, also prevented Varus from controlling them without challenge. Each reminded the other of who they had been, and together they pushed against the hatred, trying to turn their shared existence into a simple instrument. This resistance did not restore their former lives. They could not separate, return to their home, or continue as two people moving side by side. Every action passed through a body whose direction was contested by an ancient force. Even moments of control could not undo the decision at the temple. Their tragedy contains a cruel balance. Valmar succeeded in preventing Kai's immediate loss, but he could not save the life they understood. Kai remained present, yet no longer free. The choice preserved consciousness while destroying independence, which meant rescue and ruin arrived together. The Darkin also encountered something he had not expected. Varus understood anger and the need for revenge, but the bond between the mortals did not fit easily within either. Their persistence challenged the idea that strength came only from domination. They had entered his prison because one refused to abandon the other, and that same loyalty continued to limit him. Later accounts show the three moving toward a less simple relationship than their first struggle suggested. Varus remained dangerous and driven by purposes separate from the mortals, yet Valmar and Kai influenced him. Their memories and emotions could not be removed without changing the being he had become. That development does not transform the union into a happy ending. The couple's original future remains gone, and any path forward must include the presence of the Darkin who took it from them. Love keeps them from being erased, but it cannot return the ordinary separation between one person and another. Valmar and Kai belong among Runeterra's clearest tragic romances because the catastrophe arose directly from an act of devotion. Valmar did not seek conquest, immortality, or revenge when he entered the temple. He wanted Kai to live. The wish was understandable, and the result was still disastrous. Their story also mirrors Viego and Isolde while reversing its moral center. Both Viego and Valmar crossed a forbidden boundary to resist the death of someone they loved. Viego ignored Isolde's wishes and sacrificed others to his need. Valmar sacrificed himself, and the person he tried to save became caught in the price with him. One choice expanded outward into world-changing ruin, while the other closed inward around three souls trapped together. What survived in both cases was not the life the grieving person wanted. Viego could not accept that fact, but Valmar and Kai had no world left to threaten in exchange for another answer. Their struggle became the smaller, harder work of protecting each other's identities from within. Love in this story is neither a cure nor a magical victory. It is the reason two voices remain audible inside a being powerful enough to silence them. That may eventually alter Varus, but the law has not promised separation or restoration. For now, the hunters endure, together and divided at the same time. The next tragedy grew not from forbidden magic, but from a society that demanded certainty, where two people carried doubt. Leona and Diana formed their bond beneath Mount Targon, among the Solari, long before either became the living representative of a celestial power. Diana had been found as an infant after strangers from beyond Targon died in the mountain's cold. The Solari raised her within their faith, but belonging never came easily. She questioned teachings that others accepted, searched old texts for contradictions, and felt drawn to the moon even though Solari doctrines centered the sun. Leona appeared to fit the community more naturally. She trained with discipline, earned approval, and carried the expectations placed upon a promising daughter of the Rakor. Yet Diana's questions affected her. What began as frustration developed into curiosity, companionship, and eventually feelings neither could discuss safely within the world that had formed them. The writings collected as their exchanged notes reveal the relationship during its quieter stage. They challenged one another, found reasons to meet, and communicated with a tenderness hidden beneath formal language. Their closeness emerged in spaces where authority was not watching, because public recognition could have threatened both their bond and their standing. That secrecy placed a weight on everything left unsaid. Diana already feared that honesty about her beliefs would bring punishment. Admitting her feelings for Leona required another kind of vulnerability, while Leona faced the possibility that responding would disrupt the ordered identity the Solari rewarded. The two shared a kiss, but the moment did not settle what existed between them. Leona pulled away. Her reaction wounded Diana, and neither had the language or safety needed to work through it openly. Affection remained, yet shame, fear, and religious expectation entered the space between them. Diana's questions soon carried her toward Mount Targon's summit. She had discovered evidence that the moon once held a recognized place beside the sun, a truth the Solari had buried or rejected. The climb offered the possibility of an answer beyond human authorities, though few who attempt the mountain survive. Leona followed. Their paths reached the summit, where celestial power chose them as hosts of the sun and moon. They returned changed, carrying golden and silver force that made their private conflict part of something much older. Instead of two young women disagreeing over doctrine, they became embodiments of rival traditions. Diana tried to bring what she had learned to the Solari elders. She expected resistance, but the encounter escalated beyond any ordinary debate. Celestial power answered her distress, and the elders were killed. Whether Diana intended the full result mattered less to those who saw the aftermath. She fled, and the Solari treated her as a heretic. Leona arrived too late to prevent the break. Her loyalty to the Solari and her feelings for Diana now pulled in different directions, while the power of the sun intensified the role others expected her to perform. She pursued Diana, though pursuit did not erase her wish to understand what had happened. The tragedy lies in how often both women stand close to a truth they cannot yet express together. Diana does not merely reject Leona. She carries the pain of Leona's earlier withdrawal and the memory of a faith that denied her questions. Leona does not simply hate Diana. She struggles with duties built into her community, her aspect, and her own fear of everything their bond might force her to reconsider. Neither has received a final ending. They remain alive. And later lore allows the possibility that sun and moon need not remain enemies forever. That possibility is precisely why their story feels unfinished rather than hopeless. Still, the relationship they had before ascending Mount Targon is gone. Celestial power did not free them from social pressure. It enlarged the pressure until the conflict between belief and affection could affect all of Targon. Leona became the figure expected to defend the Solari Order, while Diana became proof that the Order had excluded part of the mountain's truth. Their love story ends in tragedy, without ending in absence. Each continues beneath the same sky, carrying a power that should form a pair. Yet history and fear keep them separated. The sun and moon appear to promise balance, but the people chosen to embody them inherited a division neither created alone. This is also one of the cases where an easy retelling can distort the characters. Leona cannot be reduced to a cold servant of doctrine, because her private writings show genuine care and uncertainty. Diana cannot be reduced to an innocent figure untouched by destructive power, because her awakening had consequences she must carry. Their tragedy works because both possess reasons the other cannot simply dismiss. Love remains present as tension, regret, and possibility. The loss is the simpler future they might have shared before the mountain turned personal doubt into celestial opposition. If reconciliation comes, it will not restore that earlier life. It will require them to create a new relationship after everything the Solari, the Lunari, and their aspects have placed between them. Runeterra often turns private relationships into symbols of nations or faiths. In Noxus, the process looks different. There, personal feeling is not forbidden by religious law, but it can be pushed aside by a culture that prizes strength, expansion, and usefulness above comfort. Darius and Quilletta demonstrate what happens when two people share affection, but choose opposing answers to the same empire. Darius grew up in the port city of Basilich with his younger brother Draven. They had little protection and learned to survive through toughness, quick judgment, and mutual dependence. When Noxian forces took control of the city, Darius joined the empire he had once fought against, finding within its military a path unavailable to him before. His rise came through ability rather than noble birth. Noxus presented itself as a place where strength could overcome origin, and Darius embodied that promise. Campaign after campaign carried him farther from the streets of Basilich, until he became one of the Empire's most respected commanders. Quiletta also served Noxus. Their relationship developed during years when both understood the cost of military life, and they had a daughter, Invisha. The family connection did not produce a peaceful household removed from war. Noxian expansion remained the environment around them, shaping where they lived and what each believed loyalty required. Over time, Quiletta became disillusioned with the Empire's campaigns. Basilich had been absorbed into Noxus, but imperial rule did not end conflict or guarantee that local people would be treated with care. From her perspective, distant leaders continued demanding sacrifice while describing conquest as opportunity. Darius saw the system differently. Noxus had given him and Draven a path beyond poverty, and he believed in an order where capability mattered more than inherited rank. Its failures did not erase that principle for him. Quiletta, living with the consequences in Basilich, judged the Empire by what it did to the people expected to support it. Their separation grew from that disagreement. The relationship did not collapse because affection had never existed. It collapsed because each person's experience produced a different answer to the question of what Noxus was. Darius continued serving the Empire, while Quiletta became connected to resistance against its authority. When Darius returned to Basilich, he entered a city shaped by rebellion. What might have been a homecoming became a confrontation between his public duty and private history. Quiletta stood on the other side of the conflict, and their daughter's life had also been formed by the distance between them. Invisha had followed a military path and died before the confrontation was resolved. Her loss revealed how thoroughly the Empire's wars had entered the family. Darius and Quiletta could disagree about Noxus, but neither could escape what that disagreement and the surrounding violence had taken from them. The encounter between the former lovers offered no time for a careful repair. Quiletta challenged Darius's faith in the Empire and forced him to confront costs that victory reports could hide. Darius remained committed to Noxus, though the man who returned to Basilich could not pretend that service had left his personal life untouched. Quiletta was killed during the upheaval, ending any possibility that the two might eventually understand one another outside a battlefield. Her death did not prove Darius correct, and it did not turn her resistance into a simple answer. It left him with a version of Noxus in which strength had carried him to the highest levels while failing to protect the people closest to him. Their tragedy differs sharply from Viego's. Darius did not abandon an empire for love. He chose the Empire repeatedly, even when that choice widened the distance between him and Quiletta. If Viego allowed private attachment to consume public duty, Darius allowed public duty to overtake private attachment. Neither extreme created a life the other person could share. Quiletta could not accept the suffering justified by Noxian expansion, and Darius could not abandon the structure that had given meaning to his rise. Love existed between incompatible loyalties until war removed the chance of resolving them. The story also complicates the idea that Noxus rewards strength fairly. Darius reached power because the Empire recognized his ability, yet the same system placed his family inside repeated cycles of conquest and rebellion. Opportunity and loss came from the same source. For Darius, tragedy does not produce retirement or open collapse. He continues as the hand of Noxus, carrying authority beside memories the Empire cannot replace. His public identity survives almost perfectly, which makes the private cost easier for everyone else to overlook. Quiletta's role remains equally important. She was not merely the lover waiting for a soldier to return. She developed her own political judgment, opposed him, and refused to let their past silence her criticism. Their relationship ended because both acted as full participants in the world around them, not because one existed only to motivate the other. The result is a love story broken by ideology. Darius and Quiletta cared for each other within a nation that demanded choices, and when those choices diverged, affection could not bridge them. By the time Darius understood the complete cost, there was no home left to return to. Not every tragic relationship ends under the weight of nations. Cassante and Taupe lost one another through habits that appear much smaller: pride, impatience, and the belief that love should naturally adapt to an ambition neither person had fully explained. Cassante came from Nazuma, an independent city in the dangerous lands south of Shurima. Its people had survived without the protection of an ascended ruler, building security through cooperation and the skill of hunters who confronted monsters threatening their home. Cassante wanted to become the greatest of those hunters. Taupe shared that world, but approached problems differently, where Cassante trusted physical ability, persistence, and direct action. Taupe valued study and careful preparation. Those differences first complemented one another. Admiration grew beyond camaraderie, and when Cassante admitted his feelings, he learned that Taupe returned them. Their relationship developed alongside a difficult hunt. A powerful cobra lion had resisted Cassante's efforts, and defeating it became a test around which he organized his sense of worth. Taupe studied the creature, gathered knowledge, and tried to help him understand that strength alone would not provide the answer. Cassante struggled to receive that help. Advice sounded like doubt, and patience felt like delay. The more the hunt frustrated him, the more determined he became to prove that he could solve it through his own power. Taupe's contribution, which should have strengthened their partnership, instead became another place where pride created distance. The pressure did not remain limited to the battlefield. Cassante expected Taupe to understand the importance of his goal, while Taupe needed his work and perspective to receive equal respect. Each cared for the other, but affection could not compensate for conversations they avoided or arguments they repeated. Eventually, the relationship ended. No villain carried one of them away, and no magical disaster removed their memories. They separated because the version of love they had built could not survive the way they were treating one another. That kind of loss may appear too ordinary beside the Ruination, yet its place in the lore is deliberate. Runeterra's champions often confront world-ending powers, but a relationship can still fail through recognizable human mistakes. Cassante could face monsters without knowing how to set down his defensiveness, while Taupe could understand a creature's habits more easily than he could force another person to listen. The breakup changed Cassante's understanding of strength. Defeating the Cobra Lion required him to use Taupe's knowledge rather than treating it as a challenge to his independence. He fashioned his weapons from the creature and became the celebrated hunter he wanted to be, but success arrived after the person who helped make it possible was no longer beside him. Victory could not reverse the separation. Cassante received public recognition and a clearer sense of his own flaws, yet Taupe had already moved forward. The lesson came late, as many lessons in tragic love stories do. When they met again, the encounter carried affection without pretending the past had vanished. Taupe had a new life and responsibilities of his own. Cassante could apologize and acknowledge what he had failed to understand. But apology did not entitle him to the relationship's return. Their later conversation offered something rarer than reunion: honest closure. They could recognize the love that once existed without using it as a reason to erase the choices made since. The result remained painful, though it was not cruel. Cassante and Taupe represent tragedy on a smaller scale. Nobody lost a soul, a kingdom, or a mortal body. They lost a possible life together, and they understood the value of that possibility most clearly after it had passed. The relationship also provides an answer to Viego's failure. To love someone after a relationship ends can mean accepting that they are no longer yours. Casante's growth does not culminate in taking Topi back. It appears in his ability to respect the person Topi has become and to carry the lesson without demanding a reward. That ending is bittersweet rather than hopeless. Both men continue living, and neither is reduced to the breakup. Still, the romance belongs here because it ended through flaws with lasting consequences. The tragedy is not that love was false. It is that love was real and still proved insufficient without humility. Another famous relationship ended long before either person's current story began. Illaoi and Gangplank once shared a life in Bilgewater, but their paths divided because one believed movement defined a worthy existence while the other placed identity and power he could not bear to release. Illaoi served Nagakaboros, the deity followed by the Buhru people of the Serpent Isles. The faith teaches motion, growth, desire, and the refusal to remain trapped in a life that has become stagnant. As the Kraken's priestess, Illaoi did not merely repeat those ideas. She tested people, forcing them to confront whether they were truly pursuing the lives they claimed to want. Gangplank rose through Bilgewater by force and reputation. He became the city's Reaver King, feared by crews and rivals across the port. To him, survival meant control. Authority had been won through violence and could disappear the moment others sensed weakness. The two became lovers despite belonging to different traditions. Illaoi saw strength in Gangplank, and Gangplank encountered someone who could meet him without submission. Their relationship carried intensity, but it also contained a disagreement that success temporarily hid. Illaoi's faith demanded continued motion. Gangplank's rule demanded that he hold what he had taken. The more completely he identified himself with Bilgewater's throne, the harder it became for him to imagine change as anything other than defeat. Their romance ended before misfortune destroyed his flagship and shattered his public rule. Illaoi left because Gangplank could not move beyond the person he had decided to be. Affection did not vanish at once, yet staying would have required her to betray the principle at the center of her own life. Years later, his fall forced the question she had already raised. Gangplank survived the attack but lost the image of invulnerability that had protected his rule. Bilgewater believed him dead, rivals divided his territory, and the man who once defined himself through command had to decide whether anything remained beneath the title. He came to Illaoi carrying the anger and humiliation of that loss. She did not restore him through comfort or promise that their former relationship could begin again. As the priestess of Nagakaboros, she tested him. The test asked whether Gangplank still possessed the will to move. Passing did not make him gentle, and it did not erase the harm connected to his reign. It proved that defeat had not left him entirely frozen inside the memory of lost power. Illaoi helped him after the test, even instructing others to support him, but assistance did not equal romantic reunion. She could recognize his strength and still understand why their earlier life had ended. Gangplank remained connected to her past without reclaiming the place he once held. This relationship is tragic because both characters survive and continue to matter to each other. Yet the quality that first drew them together cannot repair the difference that separated them. Illaoi wants desire to produce movement. Gangplank's deepest desire repeatedly pulls him back toward restoring his old control. Their story avoids the idea that a former lover must become an enemy. Illaoi can oppose Gangplank, test him, help him, and remember him without collapsing those actions into a single feeling. That complexity gives the relationship its weight. Gangplank also differs from Taupe. Taupe moved into a new life beyond Casante, while Gangplank returns to the same ambition that damaged his relationship with Illaoi. He changes enough to rise, though not necessarily enough to become a person with whom she could remain. No final law has placed them back together. Their bond survives as history and unfinished tension within Bilgewater, not as an active partnership. The loss contains no single instant comparable to Isolde's death or Senna's imprisonment. It unfolded through the slow recognition that loving someone did not mean sharing the same direction. For Illaoi, leaving was consistent with her faith. For Gangplank, being left became another injury to pride. Neither interpretation cancels the other, which is why the relationship never offers a simple villain. Their tragedy grew from incompatible ways of facing change. One Noxian marriage presents a much darker contrast. Elise and Berholt entered a union built around status, manipulation, and resentment, and whatever affection may have existed at its beginning was destroyed long before the marriage formally ended. Elise was born into House Kithera, an old Noxian family. From an early age, she learned to operate within a society where influence could matter as much as open military strength. When Berholt, heir to House Zarvan, courted her, the marriage offered political advantage and a powerful name. She accepted him, but the union did not create equality. Berholt wanted a wife he could display and control, while Elise refused to remain a decorative extension of his house. Their conflicts grew as she developed her own influence at court. Resentment replaced whatever promise the marriage once held. Berholt attempted to limit her power, and Elise answered through schemes of her own. In one confrontation, he injured and disfigured her, believing the damage would destroy the beauty from which she drew part of her social control. Elise responded by arranging his death. The marriage ended through retaliation rather than grief, leaving her position endangered and her body marked by the attack. Seeking restoration and power, she turned toward the hidden circles of the Black Rose. That path took her to the Shadow Isles and into the lair of a spider god. A bite transformed her, restoring her appearance while granting unnatural abilities and creating a hunger that would define her later existence. Elise returned to Noxus no longer simply a noblewoman who had survived a destructive marriage. Over the centuries that followed, she maintained youth and power by bringing victims to the Isles. Her beauty became permanent, but it depended upon a cycle of deception and sacrifice. The thing Berholt tried to take from her returned in a form that separated her from ordinary humanity. Calling Elise and Berholt a love story requires caution. The law confirms courtship and marriage, but it does not present a healthy romance ruined by outside forces. Their tragedy lies in what the relationship revealed and intensified: possession, ambition, humiliation, and revenge. Unlike Leona and Diana, they were not separated by a society that forbade their affection. Their society rewarded the political usefulness of the match while ignoring the damage inside it. Noxian aristocracy could describe the union as successful because it joined houses, even while the people within it became enemies. The ending freed Elise from Berholt's immediate control, yet it did not lead toward peace. Her answer to injury drew her into a form of power that required new victims. The marriage ended, but its struggle over beauty, influence, and domination continued within the person she chose to become. Berholt's actions cannot be excused as ordinary conflict, and Elise's later crimes cannot be reduced to something he caused. Each made choices. The relationship created the conditions for retaliation, while the Black Rose and the Spider God offered Elise a path she willingly followed. Their story belongs at the edge of this account, because love may never have been its strongest element. Still, It is one of the clearest canon marriages to end in personal ruin, and excluding it would create a falsely gentle picture of romance among Noxus's great houses. Some tragic romances are remembered because devotion survives. Elise and Berholt are remembered because devotion does not. By the end, marriage has become another battlefield, and neither person sees the other as someone whose freedom deserves respect. From that ruin, Elise gains the appearance of an eternal life, while losing any ordinary future the marriage might once have promised. The result is not heartbreak in the familiar sense. It is a warning that a union built as an exchange of power can become destructive long before anyone calls it over. Ionia preserves another relationship through a few painful admissions rather than a long romance. Yevnai loved Zed during the years when he and Shen trained within the Kinko order, but duty, secrecy, and the choices of their elders ensured that the relationship could not develop honestly. Zed entered the Kinko as a child taken in by Master Kusho. He trained beside Kusho's son, Shen, and the two became close enough to see each other as brothers. Zed's talent was clear, but his place within the order always contained uncertainty. Shen was Kusho's heir, while Zed depended upon achievement and the master's approval. Yevnai belonged to the same world of expectations. She was intended for Shen, an arrangement that treated marriage as part of the order surrounding their families. Her feelings, however, pointed toward Zed. The situation might have become a simple rivalry if either man had allowed it to do so. Instead, Zed rejected the possibility of being with her. Whatever he felt, he understood that accepting Yevnai would injure Shen and disrupt relationships already under pressure from Kusho's unequal treatment of the two students. That choice did not create peace. Shen later understood that Yevnai had loved Zed rather than him, which meant the proposed match offered him no genuine future. Zed's refusal protected the appearance of loyalty while leaving everyone involved with a truth they could not comfortably address. Their personal conflict unfolded beside the hunt for the serial killer Kada Jin. Kusho, Shen, Zed, and others spent years pursuing a murderer whose work disturbed the balance the Kenkyo were sworn to defend. The investigation exposed both young men to repeated violence and tested their faith in the Order's restraint. When Jin was finally captured, the Kinko refused to execute him. Zed saw that mercy as a failure, especially after Noxus invaded Ionia, and the Order continued to prioritize spiritual balance over direct participation in the war. His disagreement with Kusho widened until he turned toward shadow magic and eventually formed his own order. By then, any future with Yevnai had disappeared beneath larger betrayals. Zed and Shen became enemies. Kusho's true decisions created wounds neither student understood at first, and the Kinko fractured. The young man who once refused Yevnai to protect a bond with Shen ultimately became the person Shen believed had destroyed their shared family. Later confrontation forced the subject into the open. Shen recognized what Yevnai had felt, and the knowledge formed one small part of the resentment between the former brothers. Neither could return to the moment when an honest conversation might have prevented some of the hurt. Yevnai continued into a life separate from both men. That fact is important because she cannot be treated merely as a prize in their rivalry. Her love for Zed did not obligate her to wait through years of secrecy, war, and conflict between orders. Whatever possibility once existed belonged to an earlier version of all three people. This is the least complete romance in the collection, and it should not be exaggerated. The lore does not give Zed and Yevnai a long shared life comparable to Lucian and Senna or Ilaoi and Gangplank. What it confirms is an attachment blocked by loyalty and revealed after the chance to answer it had gone. Its tragedy lies in renunciation. Zed surrendered a possible relationship because he believed doing so would protect his connection to Shen and his place under Kusho. Neither connection survived. The sacrifice preserved nothing it had been intended to save. That outcome fits the larger pattern of Zed's life. He repeatedly makes choices in secret, convinced that other people must misunderstand him for a greater purpose. Secrecy grants him control over the immediate situation, but it also denies others the knowledge needed to choose beside him. Yevnai's feelings became another truth managed rather than shared. By the time Shen named it, the admission could only explain an old wound. It could not build a future. The relationship belongs among Runeterra's quieter tragedies. No kingdom fell because Zed refused Yevnai, and no supernatural prison held them together. A possible love ended beneath duty, and the duty itself later collapsed. Arcane adds one final love story with an unusual place in the wider canon. Echo and Powder are not a couple in the main history of Piltover and Zorn. Their relationship exists in another reality, which means Echo discovers a life he might have shared only when he is already searching for a way to leave it. In the world Echo knew, Powder's childhood ended during the collapse of Vanda's family. Vi disappeared, Silco took Powder in, and the girl Echo remembered grew into Jinx. Echo responded by building the firelights and resisting the violence spreading through the Undercity. The childhood friends became enemies. Their confrontation on the bridge showed that memory still affected Echo, but recognition could not erase everything Jinx had done or restore the years that separated them. Each had become a leader, shaped by a different part of Zorn. A wild rune later carried Echo and Heimerdinger into another reality. This version of the Undercity had developed without Hextech, and many people lost in Echo's world remained alive. Benzo, Vanda, Milo, and Clagger were present, while Piltover and Zorn had found a more peaceful balance. The price of that world was Vi. She had died during the childhood incident that began so much of the conflict in Echo's reality. Powder survived, grew without becoming Jinx, and formed a relationship with the local version of Echo. Echo awakened inside that counterpart's life. At first he could not separate Powder from the enemy he remembered. Her face carried every association created by his own history, even though her choices and circumstances were different. Time allowed him to see her as a person rather than a warning. This Powder had become an inventor and worked beside him. She possessed the curiosity, loyalty, and talent that tragedy had buried beneath Jinx's fear and anger in the other world. Their connection gave Echo more than personal comfort. It showed him a version of Zorn close to the future he once wanted. Cooperation had replaced some of the conflict he accepted as permanent, and people divided in his reality had learned to live beside one another. Powder helped Echo and Heimerdinger build the device needed to return home. She did not initially understand the full truth about the young man asking for her help, but she recognized that his behavior had changed and that his knowledge reached beyond the life they shared. As they worked, Echo briefly participated in the relationship belonging to his counterpart. The two attended a celebration and allowed themselves a peaceful moment together. For Echo, the experience carried affection and grief at once. He could see what might have existed between him and Powder without pretending that the woman in front of him had lived the same life as Jinx. The alternate relationship was real within its own timeline, yet it could not become his. Remaining would have meant abandoning everyone still facing danger in the reality that formed him. It would also have meant continuing to occupy a life that belonged to another Echo. Returning home required him to leave Powder behind. She realized enough of the truth to understand that he came from somewhere else, and the farewell arrived just as both recognized the importance of their short time together. This tragedy is different from every other story here, because the relationship did not fail. In its own world, Powder and Echo had built something loving and productive. The loss came from Echo understanding that a better life existed and still choosing to return to the wounded one that needed him. The alternate reality also prevented him from treating Jinx as nothing more than an enemy. Powder's life demonstrated that identity was shaped by choices, care, and circumstance. The qualities he admired had not been invented by another universe. They had been allowed to grow there. That insight did not make the two versions interchangeable. Echo could not return and demand that Jinx become the Powder he had just left. Such an expectation would repeat the mistake found in several other tragic relationships, where one person loves an image more than the individual standing before them. Instead, the experience changed what Echo believed was possible. Hope returned with him, not as certainty that every loss could be repaired, but as a refusal to believe that damage erased every better part of a person. Powder's side of the ending carries a separate sorrow. She helped a familiar young man who was not quite the partner she knew, shared a connection with him, and watched him leave for a world she could not follow. Her own Echo's life presumably continued after the visitor departed, but the experience left her with knowledge of another reality and the trace of someone who remembered her differently. Echo and Powder belong in this account with a clear qualification. Their romance did not occur between the main versions followed across most of Arcane. It existed between Powder and the Echo of her world, while the visiting Echo briefly experienced it. Calling Jinx and the main Echo an established couple would go beyond what the story confirms. The tragedy is the glimpse itself. Echo sees that a peaceful Zorn and a life with Powder were possible under different conditions, and he cannot take either home with him. He carries only the understanding gained from them. This alternate love story gives Runeterra one of its gentlest separations. No betrayal ends the relationship, and neither person tries to control the other. Echo leaves because responsibility calls him back, while Powder helps him even though his departure creates loss. Placed beside Viego, the contrast is complete. Both men encounter a world in which the person they lost appears present again. Viego tries to force that person into his desired future, regardless of her will. Echo recognizes that the life before him belongs to other people and chooses not to seize it. One decision ruins a civilization. The other gives up personal happiness to protect a damaged home. The contrast shows that grief does not determine what someone becomes. Choice still matters after loss. Bilgewater contains another relationship that survived an ending neither man expected to reverse. Malcolm Graves and Twisted Fate built their reputation as partners, separated through an apparent betrayal, and spent years carrying opposite versions of the same disastrous job. They met as criminals working along the edges of societies where cleverness and nerve could create a living. Twisted Fate brought charm, planning, and magical cards, while Graves supplied direct force and a refusal to be easily intimidated. Together, they became an effective pair of thieves and confidence men. Partnership turned into romantic attachment, though neither man expressed it with the calm openness found in a settled household. Their lives were built around risk, arguments, narrow escapes, and the knowledge that trust mattered most when almost everyone else involved in a job might lie. That trust broke during a failed operation. Graves was captured and taken to a prison known as the Locker, while Twisted Fate escaped. From Graves's position, the explanation seemed obvious. His partner had traded him away to save himself. Imprisonment gave Graves years to strengthen that belief. He survived the Locker while anger replaced the affection and dependence that had once joined them. Twisted Fate became the name attached to every part of the life taken from him. Twisted Fate carried a different account. He had not experienced the event as a simple decision to abandon Graves, but staying alive required him to continue moving. Whatever explanation he might have offered could not reach a man confined in one of the harshest prisons connected to Bilgewater. When Graves eventually escaped, he returned with revenge in mind. Their reunion did not begin as reconciliation. It brought the old partners into conflict, each protecting the story that had allowed him to live with the separation. The struggle around Gangplank's fall forced them into the same danger again. Bilgewater was changing, misfortune was moving against its ruler, and private resentment existed inside a conflict larger than either man's history. Working together restored something arguments could not. The instincts formed during their earlier partnership remained present beneath the anger. Each still understood how the other moved, lied, planned, and reacted when a job collapsed. That familiarity did not prove the lost years unimportant. Graves had suffered while believing Twisted Fate responsible, and Twisted Fate had learned to hide behind performance whenever feeling became dangerous. Reconciliation required more than discovering that they remained effective criminals. They eventually chose partnership again. Later stories present them traveling and taking jobs together, with their romantic bond made part of the canon rather than left only as a popular interpretation. Their relationship remains argumentative and unconventional, but it is real. Including them in a collection of tragic love stories requires the same qualification used for Lucian and Senna. The relationship did not remain ended. It passed through an ending, and the people who rebuilt it could not recover the time or trust lost in between. Graves's belief in betrayal was powerful because trust had once mattered so much. Anger offered a simpler identity than grief, allowing him to imagine that punishing Twisted Fate could settle everything the Locker had taken. Meeting him again revealed that the past was more complicated. Twisted Fate's habits created their own problem. A person who survives through misdirection can find honesty difficult even when deception is no longer useful. His charm could get them into and out of danger, but it could not replace the direct truth Graves needed. Their reconciliation works because neither demands a return to complete innocence. Graves does not become a man who forgets imprisonment, and Twisted Fate does not stop being evasive overnight. They choose to travel together while carrying those qualities into the renewed relationship. This makes their story one of the few in which betrayal, or the belief in betrayal, does not become permanent. Callista loses herself to vengeance after Hecarim's treachery. Graves approaches the same narrowing anger, but receives the chance to confront the person he blames. The answer changes him because Twisted Fate is present to give it. Many couples in Runeterra never receive that moment. Quilletta dies before Darius can resolve their division. Isolde returns only after Viego has caused centuries of harm, and Yevnai's feelings become clear after Zed's earlier life has collapsed. Graves and Twisted Fate find the conversation late, but not too late. Danger pushes them together long enough for old certainty to weaken. Once that happens, affection has room to return without pretending the separation never occurred. Their story also shows why an ending does not always need to be final to qualify as tragic. Years spent in resentment remain years lost. Recovery creates a future, not a replacement past. Among all the relationships gathered here, theirs may be the most encouraging. The men who once understood each other well enough to become vulnerable also knew exactly where distrust could hurt. They still chose to rebuild. That choice does not make them gentle or remove the criminal chaos surrounding them. It means the worst conclusion Graves carried from the Locker was not the only one available. A relationship that ended through silence and misunderstanding began again through shared action and an imperfect return to honesty. Across these stories, tragedy rarely comes from love alone. It comes from the belief that love can excuse control, from institutions that force affection into secrecy, from pride that treats help as humiliation, and from duties followed so rigidly that no private life can survive beside them. Viego and Isolde stand at the center because their marriage produced the greatest consequences. Isolde's death could have remained a royal sorrow. Viego transformed it into the Ruination by deciding that the world owed him a reversal, even if Isolde herself did not want the life he was forcing upon her. Callista and Ledros inherited that catastrophe without creating it. Their tragedy asks what love becomes when memory and identity are damaged beyond easy recovery. Ledros continues to recognize Callista, but recognition from one side cannot restore the person who once answered. Lucian and Senna come closer than anyone else to escaping the pattern. Thresh separated them and changed both of them, yet Senna returned with her identity intact. Their challenge became learning that reunion does not erase trauma or restore missing years. Valmar and Kai reveal another form of survival. They remain together inside Varus, but togetherness without freedom carries its own sorrow. Love protects their voices while the darkened body containing them prevents a return to the life those voices remember. Leona and Diana are separated by belief, authority, and the celestial roles placed upon them. Their relationship remains unresolved, leaving hope beside danger. Neither death nor final rejection has ended the story. But the private bond they formed can no longer be separated from the conflict between sun and moon. Darius and Quilletta show the cost of choosing an empire over a shared home. Both saw Noxus clearly from where they stood, and those positions led them toward opposite sides of the same conflict. By the time war settled the argument, understanding could no longer produce reconciliation. Cassante and Taupe bring tragedy down to a human scale. Pride ended what monsters could not, and success arrived too late to preserve the relationship. Their later honesty provides closure without pretending growth should automatically earn back a former partner. Illaoi and Gangplank demonstrate that affection can remain after two lives turn in different directions. Illaoi can care about the man Gangplank might become without returning to the relationship they once had. Helping him move does not require her to move beside him. Elise and Berholt show the darkest kind of marriage in this account, one in which social ambition and control overwhelmed any genuine care. Their union ended through retaliation, and Elise carried its struggle into a transformed life built upon deception. Zed and Yevnai represent the future surrendered before it could properly begin. Zed gave up the relationship to protect bonds that later broke anyway, leaving the truth to emerge only when it could explain the past rather than change it. Echo and Powder represent a future that existed, but in the wrong reality. Their brief connection teaches Echo that a better life is possible while requiring him to leave that life behind. Graves and Twisted Fate represent trust broken and rebuilt. Their reunion does not erase the years of imprisonment and anger, but it prevents those years from deciding the rest of their lives. Several famous League relationships do not belong on this list. Xayah and Rakan remain together. Ashe and Tryndamere began with political necessity, but have not ended in tragedy. Garen and Katarina exist within dangerous opposition, yet their story has not reached a confirmed tragic conclusion. Ezreal's interest in Lux does not establish a shared romance, and popular pairings built mainly by players cannot be treated as history. Excluding those names is not an attempt to make Runeterra less romantic. It keeps the difference between canon and possibility clear. A complete account should not turn every affectionate interaction into a relationship, or every difficult life into a tragic romance. The stories that remain share one final idea. Love in Runeterra is powerful, but power does not make it wise. It can keep a soul speaking inside a darken, sustain a search across centuries, or give two sentinels the courage to fight darkness together. It can also become an excuse used by people who refuse to hear the person they claim to love. The healthiest figures in these tragedies eventually recognize limits. Cassante accepts that Taupe's new life belongs to Taupe. Illaoi helps Gangplank without surrendering her own direction. Lucian learns that recovering Senna does not give him the right to decide every danger she may face. Ledros seeks Callista's freedom even though that freedom may leave him alone. Viego cannot accept the same boundary. He treats Isolde's death, her soul, and finally her refusal as obstacles placed in front of his desire. That failure separates devotion from obsession more clearly than any speech could. He says the world means nothing without her, while his actions show how little room he leaves for the real person she was. Tragedy also exposes what ordinary life might have offered. Valmar and Kai could have remained hunters in Ionia. Leona and Diana might have explored their beliefs without becoming enemies of faith. Darius and Quilletta could have watched their daughter grow outside an imperial conflict. Cassante and Taupe might have combined courage with knowledge before resentment hardened around both. Those futures matter because none required a perfect world. They required time, honesty, and freedom. 3 things Runeterra repeatedly takes from its people. Wars shorten time, institutions punish honesty, and magic can destroy freedom completely. Even so, these relationships are not identical warnings with different names. Isolde is not responsible for Viego's choices. Senna is not a passive reward for Lucian's persistence. Diana's pain does not erase Leona's conflict, and Quilletta's opposition to Darius does not make their earlier affection meaningless. Each person retains a separate will, even when another character struggles to recognize it. That separate will is the line running through every tragic ending. Love can join 2 lives, but it cannot make them one possession. Whenever a character forgets that boundary, the relationship becomes smaller than the desire controlling it. Whenever the boundary is respected, loss may remain painful, but it does not need to spread into new harm. Runeterra offers few peaceful endings because its stories are built around conflict. Champions continue fighting, ancient powers return, nations demand loyalty, and spirits carry old injuries into the present. A relationship can survive one danger only to face another. Yet tragedy does not prove that love was pointless. Valmar and Kai still resist erasure. Senna returned because she refused to surrender herself inside the lantern. Ledros's search preserves a memory the Shadow Isles could otherwise consume. Even Cassante's lost relationship changes the kind of protector he becomes. What tragedy removes is the promise that love automatically conquers everything placed against it. Sometimes it cannot defeat death. Sometimes it survives death but cannot recover time. Sometimes the people involved remain alive and discover that care is not enough to overcome incompatible choices. These stories begin in different parts of the world, from Camavor and the Blessed Isles to Ionia, Targon, Noxus, Nazuma, and Bilgewater. They involve kings, soldiers, hunters, priests, nobles, and people who never expected their private lives to become part of a legend. What connects them is not a single curse. It is the moment each relationship meets something love cannot simply remove. For Viego, that moment is death and refusal. For Ledros, it is the loss of recognition. For Lucian and Senna, it is the knowledge that return cannot restore the years between them. For Valmar and Kai, it is survival without independence. For Leona and Diana, it is love made dangerous by doctrine. For Darius and Quilletta, it is loyalty divided by empire. For Cassante and Taupe, it is understanding that arrives after separation. For Illaoi and Gangplank, it is motion in opposing directions. For Elise and Berholt, it is a marriage emptied of care. For Zed and Yevnai, it is a possibility abandoned to protect a loyalty that did not last. For Echo and Powder, it is discovering the right future in a reality that cannot become home. For Graves and Twisted Fate, it is the damage left after trust returns. That is why the most tragic love stories in League of Legends lore are not only stories about who died. They are stories about what remained afterward. A ruined kingdom, a voice inside a weapon, a note never answered, an old lover standing on the opposite side of a rebellion, or the quiet knowledge that becoming better does not reopen every closed path. Some of these stories may still change. Leona and Diana could meet again with a clearer understanding of what happened between them. Valmar and Kai may continue influencing Varus. Lucian and Senna remain active among the Sentinels, and the future of the Shadow Isles still holds unanswered questions for Callista and Ledros. An unfinished tragedy is still a tragedy, but it is not the same as a hopeless one. Runeterra's lore leaves room for people to make different choices after loss, even when it refuses to erase the consequences of earlier ones. The final lesson belongs not to the grandest king, but to the quieter survivors. Love is most faithful when it recognizes another person as a life beyond itself. Without that recognition, devotion can become a cage. With it, even a relationship that ends can leave behind something gentler than ruin.